Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Hanna Siarova. I'm a research director at PPMI, part of the Variant Group, but also act as a deputy scientific coordinator for ENESET. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to the third Research to Policy webinar organized by the ENESET network and the European Commission. And today we focus on quite a crucial and very timely topic, how to better support literacy teaching. And we are fortunate to have a truly excellent panel of speakers, Professor Colin Harrison from the University of Nottingham, Professor Sari Sulkunen from University of Jyväskylä, and Oana Felecan from the GEAC, and of course Marco Montanari from the GEAC, who is an economic and policy analyst at the Commission, but also acts as a scientific coordinator of ENESET network from the Commission side. So without further ado, I will give the first floor to Marco to give us an introductory word about the webinar. The floor is yours, Marco.
Thank you very much, Anna. Good afternoon. A warm welcome to all participants, also from the European Commission. So this is the third webinar of our EAC Research to Policy series on education that we organized together with ENESET, the expert network on economics and sociology of education and training. But why is today's topic so relevant for European education systems? The reason is that despite several years of dedicated work to strengthen basic skills across Europe, the latest PISA results delivered a kind of wake-up call. Reading performance is slipping, and around 25% of EU students fail to reach basic proficiency levels in reading. So this is not just a number. It's a challenge that affects our classrooms, our communities, and broadly speaking, our future. So in today's webinar, we want to move past the idea that literacy is just about reading and writing. We have two main objectives. The first one is to gain a clear, evidence-based understanding of what effective literacy teaching truly looks like. So we need to embrace I think a richer, more complex set of skills that young people need to have today to navigate an information-dense world. And then our second goal is to connect what happens in the classroom with the broader systems that shape education. Together with our speakers, we will look at how strong research evidence can guide policies, both nationally and at EU level. Because the challenge every education system must address is really building coherent and impactful frameworks that support every learner. And before leaving the floor to our speakers, this is the last webinar of 2025, but we will be back in January with new exciting topics. So let me just wish a bit in advance good holiday seasons to all of you. And now, please, Hanna, back to you.
Thank you so much, Marco, for this introduction and for giving also the context for the topic of this webinar. And before we actually dive into the evidence and policy insights, I would like to say also a few words about how today's webinar is structured. So we will begin with 3 presentations. As I said, we have an excellent panel of speakers who are ready to share their knowledge and insights with you. And as you listen to these presentations, please feel free to post your questions, comments in the chat at any time. After the presentations, we will have some space to react to the selected questions. And of course, I'm sure our speakers will be ready to follow up with you via email or in other settings to discuss some of the questions raised. And we will also use a Padlet discussion to gather some of your insights on 3 broader policy questions. And the link to each of the Padlet will be posted in the chat at the right time. And with that, let us begin our first presentation. And it is my pleasure to introduce you our first speaker, Professor Colin Harrison. Colin is an emeritus professor of literacy studies in education at the University of Nottingham, and he has been also a principal investigator on 25 research projects on technology and learning, and focusing particularly on students' use of the internet, and he has been a consultant to the OECD on technology and learning. And Colin is also a lead author of the recent ENESET INI analytical report on effective practices for literacy teaching, which offers quite a number of evidence-based insights on addressing literacy challenges that Marco was talking about. And I invite Colin to share a few of those insights with us. And his task today is quite impossible, I think, nearly impossible, to summarize this report, such a rich report, in just 15 minutes. But I think we can make this happen. And Colin, the floor is yours. And the link to the report will be also shared in the chat if you are interested to have a look. So Colin, I invite you to the digital stage. Please unmute yourself, and you can also share your screen.
I think I've unmuted, and thank you very much for that introduction. Of course, you're absolutely right, Hanna. It's very difficult for a professor to summarize a 50,000 word report. Normally, one of my paragraphs lasts 12 minutes. It's certainly possible to draw out some key points for emphasis and some highlights. First, I want to pay tribute to my co-authors. There were 5 of us who wrote this report, and we also benefited from the advice and reviews of the European Commission advisors, and we learned enormously from them, and we're grateful to them. I'm going to share a presentation with you, and I want to emphasize the importance of certain key factors in relation to learning to read, and I'm going to put a lot of emphasis on talk and how people learn to read and how that's related to talk. We used to think that learning to read began when children went to school, and of course, as most people who are attending today are aware, we now believe that learning to read starts at birth or even before birth, as children are beginning to process sounds and develop phonological awareness, which is one of the keys to learning to read, from birth. And they're also learning vocabulary. And we know that parents and carers who talk to children from birth are making enormously valuable contributions to that child's future learning. We know that children's vocabulary at age 3 is a very good predictor of their reading ability at age 16. Now, what does that mean? It means that children's preschool language development is critically important to their future development. And that has implications for policymakers. It's crucial, as European Commission colleagues know, to provide support not only from age 2 or 3 in early care environments, but also before that. And many of the research reports that we drew upon in writing our report emphasized family literacy and preschool family literacy engagements with toddlers that are helping to both develop, in some cases, parents' literacy as well as children's literacy. And so from the point of view of policy, it's very, very valuable to put resources into the first 5 years of children's literacy learning lives. It's incredibly valuable in terms of the economics of education. We know from research into these things that researchers found that $1 spent on preschool literacy produces between $7 and $12 worth of learning at the end. If you start later, it costs more. If you're trying to pay for catch-up courses, of course they're important, but they cost more than preschool literacy. So that's a very high priority for many countries and many policy groups. I'd also want to emphasize some other points. We worry about infants learning in relation to technology. Many of us are concerned when we're walking around our towns to see infants in a pram with a screen in front of them and no parent engagement. Is that a good thing? We know that it actually can be hampering development, and it's valuable for parents to know this. Children learn and develop their vocabulary and their language through interaction more than anything else. And if they're just watching a screen, they don't interact in the way they do when they're talking with a parent, with a mum, with someone in the street. And that's very important for every parent to know. And I think we can get better at teaching parents. Many of us, when we're waiting now in the doctor's waiting area, are looking at a screen, and it's saying things like, don't smoke, have checks if you're an older male for your prostate. What we don't see are images of how to develop children's literacy, and I think we could be doing a lot more in that kind of area. What we learn from research is that children's own learning is interactive, and they learn from digital resources when that digital resource is personalized and interactive. So it's not the screen that's damaging, it's the lack of interaction. I'm going on to my next slide. We know that across Europe, children are reading less, and our report gave research that shows that, and many teachers will confirm that. Why is this really potentially disastrous? Well, it's for a couple of reasons. One is that when children get to the age of 9, that's the point when an average reader is encountering vocabulary that they don't encounter in everyday life. And so their reading becomes even more important in relation to future academic success. And it's therefore very, very important that we try to get children continuing to read or to be read to. Reading while listening is also very valuable, so that they're continuing to develop their vocabulary and their knowledge. We also know that if you say, are children learning as much from digital resources when they're surfing the internet as from hard copy books? The answer is we have got research that shows that children process meaning more deeply when they're working from hard copy. And so that is a very good reason for getting books and hard copy in front of children in schools, in libraries and in classrooms. There's a great deal in our report saying how should teachers improve their practice, and I would say they need to see examples of good practice, and they need to find ways of incorporating those in their classroom. This leads me to my next slide, which is confirming, if you look on the left-hand side, that we have 20 good practice examples of initiatives in the classroom that have been shown to improve reading. So we're not just saying to teachers, read this report, we're saying these are specific and tangible ways in which you can implement some of the things we're talking about in your classroom. And wherever you see these asterisks on my slide, that's indicating that there's a good practice example on how to develop phonological awareness. As I said, it's developing from birth, but also teachers can do a great deal to develop phonological awareness with young children in the classroom, and games, singing, playing word games like I Spy, looking around the classroom, finding things that rhyme, using poetry. All of those things are developing phonological awareness, which is feeding into their ability to learn from phonics teaching. Nearly all teachers share our view that teaching phonics is important, but one of the things research has shown is that we don't teach phonics first and then comprehension after that. What research has shown is that we should be teaching both from day one. And as I know, and Sari Sulkunen knows, that teaching of comprehension carries on through primary school and into secondary school and beyond. And we also give plenty of examples of how that should be done. AI is a challenge for all teachers. And what we want to say as those who are guiding education is that there are many AI-driven digital resources that can help improve literacy. One reason for that is because AI is often implicated in personalization of support for readers, and it is the weaker readers who benefit most from those extra resources. They're also very helpful for learners with second language needs. There are now loads of reading support tools that cover every European language and which can be brought to bear in the work that a teacher is doing. I've mentioned that we put an emphasis on talk, and I would say we came to realize in writing this report that although we all know that talk is good and that it's helpful for children to relate to each other, we now are much clearer about the relationship between talk and learning. We know that preschool talk is more important than we might have realized. For example, when an adult is reading a book with a child before school, the children learn loads more and their vocabulary develops more if the parents talk about what was in that book. And the same applies in school. It's through interaction that vocabulary is developed. And so, as well as reading, we're looking for ways of getting reading connecting to talk. Yes, expressive activities and acting out is good, but also there are many ways in which we can be bringing connections that involve talk into the classroom to help children deal with more complex texts. And although there isn't time for me to go into the detail here, the phrase reciprocal teaching is one that is very important in our report and will be important as teachers implement that report. What reciprocal teaching does is to switch the role of being a teacher to the child. And the children work in a small group in which one is leading a conversation with 2 or 3 other children about the text. And they're taking turns at being the teacher, saying, what do we understand? What do we not understand? What questions do we have? What vocabulary do we need to understand more deeply? And there have now been more than a couple of hundred research reports on reciprocal teaching that have demonstrated that it can be incredibly effective from primary school through to secondary school and high school. And so we talk, and you can see from that asterisk, we give examples of how to do reciprocal teaching in our report. So what are our key takeaway messages? Well, encouraging interactive talk is very important, and it's a good thing for teachers to understand, because very often a teacher will say, how can I teach these kids if they can't read? And my answer to begin with is to say, can they talk? Because if they can talk, you've got an anchor point for connecting the reading and the learning. And there are many ways in the report that we talk about doing that. In terms of cost effectiveness, I would emphasize again, early intervention and digital tools are both highly cost effective. You can't simply chuck digital equipment at the classroom. We know that that doesn't work. We need to have professional development that connects up the tools that are in this report with teachers. And that needs funding. And I think it will be important for resources to be connecting teachers with other teachers. I've worked in WhatsApp group within different subject areas across schools to talk about what they're doing and how that can improve the work that they're doing. And I encourage, and we encourage that kind of approach. Declining interest in reading is something we have to face. It impacts vocabulary development and comprehension, but also reading develops socio-emotional learning. And goodness me, many teachers have said that's an important and a frighteningly worrying area in terms of what's happening in schools at the moment. Children are learning to connect with other people, with the world, when they read. It's not just about improving the economic power of a country. Reading is more than, although it's important in relation to employment, it's also a cornerstone of civilization. And we, as authors of the report, share Ivan Illich's view that teachers are the custodians of civilization. In that sense, a teacher is more important than a doctor or an engineer, because the teachers are the ones who produce doctors and engineers, and they should be respected and supported as they embark on those very important life-changing events that occur as children learn to read. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colin, and a special thanks for also managing to fit this into 15 minutes. That's amazing, and sharing so many good insights. And for me, I think one of the most interesting insights is that the foundation of literacy development are actually very social and based a lot on interaction, on shared reading, on rich literacy environments, and they matter as much as just some of this technical decoding reading skills. And also one striking element while hearing you was that this like simple talk about text is also like a very underestimated but in a way powerful driver for literacy development. And as the report shows, fostering a culture of reading is not some add-on, but actually a prerequisite for a cost-effective and system-wide investment in skills development. So I see that my colleagues already shared the link to the report in the chat, and we also want to draw your attention that there is a set of fact sheets that Colin and colleagues were working on to accompany this report that are being finalized and soon will become available on the ENESET website and the EC Publication Office. So they distill the key findings of the report in like shorter messages, and also target different education levels. So we invite you to check them, and we will send them also in the follow-up message. And a reminder that please remember to ask questions to the speakers in the chat, and we will return to them shortly. And now I would like to pass the floor to our next speaker, Sari Sulkunen, who works as a professor in Finnish language and multiliteracies at the Department of Language and Communication Studies in the University of Jyväskylä in Finland. And she is one of the co-authors of the Finnish National Literacy Strategy 2030, and also a member of the Reading Expert Group for PISA 29. And Sari was also one of the co-authors of this report that has just been presented by Colin. But today we ask her to join her in the capacity of the co-author of the Finnish literacy strategy and share with us some insights from the policy process, from the design stage, on how the strategy came about, and the implementation journey. So Sari, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Hanna, for the kind invitation and an introduction as well. And while I try to share my slides, I also want to compliment Colin Harrison for making the impossible accomplishing the task of summarizing in 15 minutes the extensive report, or at least some key points of the extensive report that we wrote together. Well done, Colin. Let's see if I can keep up with my time. As Hanna said, I will be talking about the Finnish National Literacy Strategy and the development process of this strategy. It's obviously quite a sort of an extensive process, but I will try to raise some key points about the process and the things that I find important when writing such a literacy strategy. This strategy, which is also available online, open access, it is the first sort of a comprehensive national literacy strategy that in Finland we have written. And it started in 2020 on the initiative of Parliament's Education and Culture Committee after some wide concerns over negative trends on literacy, similar trends that than Marco in the beginning of this webinar described. And the overall aim of this strategy document is to support developing literacy skills of people of all ages. We have had all kinds of sort of working groups and national programs, priority programs related to literacy earlier in Finland, but in this case, we have sort of a more comprehensive approach than the earlier programs. And one quite important key aspect, I think, is that now also adults are covered by the same literacy strategy. In earlier programs, quite often it has been children and adolescents as a target group, and it's of course very important target group, but we shouldn't forget adults either. Also, already in the beginning phase of this project, the idea was to also outline literacy program, which would have concrete objectives and measures. And while writing this strategy, we found 3 focus areas that are highlighted in the strategy document. First of all, there are objectives and measures related to establishing and supporting structures on national, regional, and local level for supporting literacy and doing literacy work, as we say, together in collaboration with all kinds of stakeholders. The second sort of focus area are the competencies of professionals, and this includes teachers. In Finland, we are very proud of our teachers, but we do see that in the changing world of literacy, we also need to update teachers' competencies and expertise, but also all other experts and stakeholders who are working with literacy, from libraries, from early education and care centers to basically everyone who work with literacy. And the third focus area is motivation and engagement in literacy, particularly in reading. As Colin Harrison just pointed out, there is a negative trend in reading engagement and in amount and frequency of reading, for instance, books. I think in children and youth, but also to some degree among adults. One key feature of writing this strategy was that we had quite a sort of a big working groups, and these groups included people from various areas of life, somehow being stakeholders in literacy. We had a smaller project group chaired by the Finnish Reading Center director Ilmi Villacis, and then we had in this project group also support from the National Agency for Education, but also library people, researchers, and so on. But we had a wider steering group, even more stakeholders from various fields of literacy work and society, not only people from National Agency or Ministry for Education and Culture, but also people from cultural foundations, author associations, publisher association, library associations, and so on. So we tried to invite people to these groups that are from very sort of a diverse areas. And I think we had in these 2 groups, we had quite a sort of active interaction, regular meetings, And the steering group, as the name says, was steering the project group. So bringing sort of also all kinds of input and ideas to the project group to process. And the project group in which I was a member was indeed responsible for writing the strategy document. One of the important starting points in our work was that we found literacy and developing literacy in Finland everybody's responsibility. So while it is true that teachers and schools and also early education and care have very important role in supporting literacy, especially in the early years of childhood and also in adolescence, we find literacy and supporting literacy everybody's responsibility. And this figure, I'm sure you cannot see the details, but I just wanted to sort of take this from the strategy to illustrate how this strategy really has a comprehensive starting point, also in terms of who is it written for and who is it about. So we think that all these different stakeholders on a national, regional, and local level are responsible for supporting literacy in Finland. And the figure, the people and stakeholders and associations and organizations listed in this figure, it's not exhaustive list, but it's just illustrating how we sort of had a sort of a comprehensive approach also to engaging people in supporting literacy in Finland. Another important starting point for the strategy work was to ask ourselves, what do we mean by literacy? What are we focusing on? What are we interested in when we aim to support literacy of people in all ages in our national context? And we had quite a vivid discussions about this already in 2018 in another group of literacy stakeholders, a much bigger group with a larger representation of different stakeholders. And then we found that we all agreed quite quickly on definition of literacy. But then when we were celebrating this sort of a surprisingly unanimous view on literacy, we understood that we don't actually agree on what do we mean by text. And that, of course, meant that we don't actually agree on definition of literacy either. So these discussions were also important in this early phase of strategy work. And there were people suggesting that we should actually focus on perhaps more traditional literacy in the sense of reading and writing written texts. And this is, of course, something that PISA and other international assessments focus on and show negative trend. So the concern was, and the idea was that, okay, here there's a negative trend, there are concerns, why don't we focus on these skills? At the same time, in our national educational documents, steering documents, we had a wider perspective on literacy. So we talk about multiliteracy and recognize that also other semiotic resources, visuals, audio visuals, and so on, are quite important in today's literacy and textual world. And we felt that we could not have sort of a more narrow approach in a comprehensive national literacy strategy than we do actually within the educational field. And that's why we also decided to start with the definition on literacy, which is very similar to the key competencies for lifelong learning and the definition of literacy in that European Commission document. So we talk about multiliteracy and embrace also other semiotic resources and texts than language. Although we do underline in the strategy that language and written texts are quite important in many areas of life, and it's crucial also to develop reading and writing skills. So we are not excluding them, of course. Another key point, of course, is that we should base our work on research. So we should have actually evidence for any measures, objectives, or recommendations that we include in the reading strategy. That was important from the start. And we did have sort of a relatively extensive literature review on literacy competencies to identify where we should have specific focus, where we should have these key objectives for the strategy. Priority was given to studies that were large scale, either international or national, so that we would have sort of a representative evidence on all the age groups included in the strategy. But we did identify in the process gaps in research, particularly related to multiliteracies and areas that are not covered by more traditional literacy assessments like PISA, for instance, for youth. And we did get a lot of positive feedback also from the research community for finding research and evidence base as such a key feature in the strategy. At the same time, I have to say that we would have benefited even more solid evidence base and research, especially regarding the measures for reaching the aims of the strategy. We do have some evidence-based measures and some measures that we unanimously thought were very good idea to include in the strategy. But I think in this regard, we maybe could have done better job. But as always, it's a question of resources then. And another key point, before I tell you a little bit about implementing the strategy, is engaging external experts and stakeholders in the work. As I mentioned earlier, we wanted to engage widely various diverse stakeholders, and that meant that already during the project group's work, we had these surveys and sort of oral hearings for stakeholders on their views on current state of literacy in Finland and what should the aims be and what kind of means and measures should we have to sort of reach those aims. We also had some expert webinars bringing in international experts on certain aspects of the literacy, for instance, on book gifting programs. Peter Jenkins was there talking in one of our webinars. William Broso talked about content area and disciplinary literacies, and David Mallows on adult literacy. There were some others as well, but these as a sort of a certain examples. At the finalizing phase, just before launching the strategy, we had a very extensive round of comments. So the strategy draft was available for comments in an online platform. Basically, anyone interested could provide comments. And we did get a lot of feedback on comments and did take into account that feedback as well as possible. So these were just a few key points that I feel that were important in writing the strategy. But I have to say that if we don't focus and pay attention and also allocate resources for implementing the strategy, it doesn't have any meaning. It becomes only a sort of a paper or online document somewhere, and it doesn't really contribute to the aims that we have included in the strategy. Luckily, we have had some resources for implementing the strategy, and in the National Agency for Education, there's a working group taking care of the implementation phase. And they have also allocated funds. So there have been sort of a calls for funding certain programs and projects on a municipality level, on the local level, for instance, on a school level, but also on the level of early childhood education and care. So there are three sort of programs that aim for implementing the strategy. As I mentioned, the one in the early childhood education and care at schools, and then on a local municipality level. And for instance, on a municipality level, there are a lot of cities and municipalities in Finland currently drafting their own local literacy strategies, provided with the funding provided by the National Agency and the Literacy Strategy Task Force. You can see some of the sort of a program-specific aims here on the slide. But overall, I would just say that it's really crucial to have also funding and to sort of inspire the literacy work on a grassroots level. And I think this is a very nice accomplishment. Of course, we always could have more resources on this work, but it's a very good beginning for making literacy visible and sort of inspiring people to do innovative literacy projects together with their colleagues and peers on a early childhood education centers, for instance, with parents, with libraries, and so on. So the idea in all these programs is to engage the local stakeholders to collaborate in the local literacy work. Okay. Thank you so much. I just wanted to raise these points very quickly. I hope I didn't exceed my time limit. I'm sure Hanna will tell me if I did
Thank
that.
you so much, Sari. Yes, I think you were perfectly on time too. So congratulations on that, and also congratulations on also very insightful presentation. And I think for me it was striking to see that in Finnish experience and all the consultations, this whole message coming through that literacy is everyone's responsibilities, from ministries to municipalities and citizens, cultural actors, and how this broad and systematic consultation can sort of pave the way to this more strengthened ownership of the wide country strategy, and then hopefully also consistent implementation. And I think we will have a chance to engage into some of these discussions on, for example, multiliteracies for the digital multimodal world in the Padlet discussion. So now I would like to wrap up our presentation panel with our final speaker and invite to our virtual stage Oana Felecan, who is the policy officer in charge of equity and well-being at the EAC in the European Commission, and she will briefly talk to us about the Commission's action plan on basic skills and linked initiatives on literacy. So please, Oana, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Hanna, and it's really interesting to follow and hear the insights from Professor Harrison and Professor Sulkunen. So indeed, on my side, I will try to place this report in the wider policy context and the European context and what we are trying to achieve. First of all, let me also start by saying that this report, this very rich report, has been commissioned by the European Commission precisely with the aim to gather the latest evidence and feed into the preparation of the action plan on basic skills. This action plan on basic skills was adopted earlier in March this year as part of a broader package on the Union of Skills to respond to the very urgent need that also Marco mentioned in the introduction of this webinar. Across Europe, we see a decline in literacy, numeracy, science, digital, and citizenship. If I can have the first slide, please. The underachievement rate has largely increased. Mathematics readings also. At European level, it reaches 26% in reading, the underachievement, which means in practice that 1 in 4 15-year-old pupils in EU fail to understand elementary text. So it shows the urgency of the measures. And this worrying decline is indeed something that we need to tackle, because these skills form the foundation for further learning, employability, democratic engagement, and social cohesion. And yet too many pupils and also adults are lacking this proficiency. So in order to reverse this trend, the European Commission intensifies its efforts to look into these matters. With the adoption of this basic action plan on basic skills. If I can have the next slide, please. However, what is important to mention is that this plan, it does not come out of scratch. It builds on previous work done, and this was also mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, but it needs to pave the way and to set the conditions that are needed to improve the acquisition of the basic skills. And I would like just to zoom in, because this is not the only initiative, but one important one. It's the Pathways to School Success Council recommendation, which was adopted in 2022 and sets a new policy framework for addressing decline in basic skills, but also addressing early school leaving, so prevention of early school leaving. And a very important piece is this link with well-being, because in order well-being at school, we know it was also mentioned in the previous presentations. It's not only about individual well-being and capacity, but it is about relationship. It is about school environment. It is about how the entire environment communicates and engages towards a certain objective. So the Pathways framework tries to address this at the same time, these objectives at the same time, with a high focus on prevention, with the objective that every learner is entitled and has the right to achieve its own trajectory at school by having adequate support with the help from multidisciplinary and cross-sectoral teams. And for instance, just if we try to take a moment to zoom in on this framework with a lens of literacy and reading, it means that, for instance, a child who experiences delay, or the school puts in place, the educators, first of all, are competent to identify early on these delays, to identify early on the needs that the child needs, and where to put in an emphasis and in place preventative measures in an environment which is supportive and which is caring for these children. And from this perspective, a lot of work has been done in the period 2022-2025 in cooperation with member states to implement pathways to school success and to support to go into a direction, a systemic direction, which enables a flexible support measures. However, more is needed to be done to address this decreasing trend. Also, just a second, also on the well-being piece, when we look at, for instance, the disruptive behavior, violence at school, bullying, we know there is a very strong correlation. The latest PIRLS data show a very strong correlation between being exposed to bullying and learning and reading of children. So correlation doesn't mean causality. However, the message is very clear that the approach is the same. The policy measures should be approached together at the same time. So when hence very important to keep in mind these links. Now, if we go further, so what's ahead of us with the action plan on basic skills, and if I can have the next slide. As I said, this report also helped us understand where the emphasis should be. Just very briefly, the action plan on basic skills does not look only at literacy, but really looks at the 5 basic skills which are the foundation for all future learning, and it builds also on the previous Council recommendation on key competencies for lifelong learning, the 2018 that also Sari mentioned in her presentation. But what's first literacy? What is it? We agree literacy today is not simply reading and writing. We have seen this. It's the ability to understand, to use and evaluate information, whether it's visual, audio, digital, textual, and across disciplines and context. Again, I'm saying it again, it is a foundation for early for all learning. But we also see the struggle and the challenges that it faces. Early language competencies, we have heard it in previous presentation, which is key to later reading success, is weakening. More and more children start school with limited proficiency in their first language or the language of schooling. Reading habits, it's another challenge. We have seen it are changing from paper text to more short digital context. And education system need to understand how to differentiate these influences. Now, if I can have the next slide, please. What also are the drivers and the challenges behind not only literacy, but the whole spectrum of basic skills that we need to tackle? We know they are quite complex and very much interlinked one to another. Socioeconomic inequalities continues to be the stronger predictor of school performance, and underachievement is extremely high among disadvantaged students. Gap are widening. For instance, disadvantaged learners are at 6.1 times higher risk of combined underachievement in the different topics. Then teacher shortages, it's a structural issue. Acute teacher shortages that have a negative impact on learning outcomes, as the teacher workforce is aging with fewer teachers enter into the profession. So there needs to be measures to prevent this trend. Something we have seen, parental involvement declining, very important, and so parents from vulnerable conditions from vulnerable situations are also more at risk to not properly accompany their children, and digital distractions are becoming a challenge that impact not only learning but also concentration and well-being. So to address this trend, the action plan, if I can have please my next slide. The action plan looks at main areas and flagship initiatives. So it contains a series of 17 actions grouped around 3 main themes, which is boosting basic skills teaching and learning, supporting educators, and enabling supporting environments. And here I will just give you a very short, brief examples on what we are currently working on. So in 2026, the initiatives will be adopted. Preparing the basic skills support scheme and the European School Alliance. This will build also on the key conditions that were mentioned earlier. European teacher and trainers agenda. And in terms of supportive environment, European Literacy Coalition. Maybe just a few words on this coalition. As is one of the key initiatives, and the idea emerged during the European Day of Author Conference in Leuven last year, with the idea to bring together governments, businesses, libraries, educators, cultural organizations, and many others to foster a culture of reading, to raise awareness on the literacy crisis, and to encourage young people, and especially boys. This also we know there are slight differences, to read for pleasure. If I can have my next slide, I realize also the timing is a bit tight. However, many other actions in the action plan, as I mentioned, there are 17, also feed into and complement these fact sheets. And a very important point we also need to strengthen is stronger cooperation with early childhood education and care, and how the early prevention, early intervention can be strengthened, but also access to early childhood education and care for vulnerable families as a preventive measure and to support children. And it's also very important to mention all these are with the perspective of a rights of the child approach in mind. And if I can have my last slide, and of course, the action plan basic skills does not work in isolation. It links with other building blocks and initiatives like the STEM education strategic plan, looking at STEM subjects across in a lifelong learning perspective, but also preventative measures to address the needs to make the environments best suited for children to learn. Like the European Child Guarantee and the upcoming anti-poverty strategy. And with this, I think I overcome a bit my time.
A little bit, but that's still fine.
Yeah.
I think we are managing. Thank you so much, Oana, also for putting this into the context of literacy development specifically. I think we don't have a lot of immediate questions to the speakers. I see there was one question on how the development of the executive function skills is being addressed in some of these action plans that have been developed. So I would invite maybe Sari, Oana to try to answer this question in writing. And I would suggest that we would move to the Padlet discussion because this is where I think we can give space to the participants to also share more of their comments and insights. So my colleagues, while many people maybe are still thinking about their questions, we can address a few of these questions after the Padlet discussion. So I see that my colleagues already shared the link to the first question. I will also share my screen so that we could see. So as I mentioned, everyone is welcome to join the Padlet and write your questions or comments on some of the topics that we are raising. And I think based on the discussion that we had so far, we saw that Colin reminded us how some of the functions and skills and the expressive vocabulary already at the ages early as 2 or 3 years old predict later literacy. And Sari showed us how literacy is being tackled in Finland as a lifelong learning cross-generational effort. So this brings us to this first broader question on the Padlet on how policies can help us close those literacy gaps across generations. And we know that, of course, the starting early matters, and we also need to invest in early interventions and close that gap. But there are also questions on how we can reach and empower those who didn't get the chance to start early. So I would invite our speakers to share their thoughts, and maybe I can give the first floor to Colin. You have 2 minutes.
Okay. Yes, I'm very happy to offer some thoughts in this very important area. We didn't go into a lot of detail in the report on all aspects of this, but I've been involved in evaluations of literacy initiatives preschool that involve parents as well as children. And I think some of those studies give us very, very valuable insights into what needs to be done. How do I learn to be a parent? Well, the answer is it's a stumbling and difficult journey for all of us. But I've been involved as an evaluator of projects that have been magnificent in coming up with answers to that question. Imagine a preschool in which the children aren't left. Children aged 2 and 3 come with their parents, and their parents stay for 2 hours for the whole of the experience. There are, first of all, 4 or 5 helpers in that group, and they make sure that at least 2 of those helpers speak the language of some of the people in that community who don't speak the country's language. So they can talk to the parents in their own language about what they're doing. So that's the first thing. Secondly, the activities in the group are modeling for parents how to be a good parent. They're singing songs, they're singing nursery rhymes, they're demonstrating that song is happy, and they might be dancing, and that those are good things for a parent to do, which is valuable in the child's overall development. So they're demonstrating that. Then they're also working with the parents to show how they might play. What do you do with a sand tray, a large sand tray? How might we use that? We might put sand into a container and then see how many other containers we can fill. You might be doing something similar with liquid. Those of us who know our early research into Piaget's learning standards know that those are some of the tests that Jean Piaget developed for looking at children's development, their understanding of children's understanding of volume and shape, working with plasticine, rolling things that were a ball into a sausage. All of those things are ways of playing that are valuable for learning. And the parents are learning how they might do those things in that environment. When someone arrives late with their child halfway through the session, do they get told off for arriving late? No. Everyone claps and hugs the mum and hugs the child and shows that they're demonstrating welcoming and love and a lack of judgment about that parent. And so that whole project was doing wonderful things. And what I discovered was that one of the mothers, who wouldn't even come to the group initially, she only came because they wouldn't let the older child out of school. They kept the older child, so mum had to cross the playground to get in. They encouraged that woman to bring her 2-year-old, who then was learning English in that group, and the mother was starting to keep a record in English of what she was learning in that environment. And then it turned out a year later, she was beginning to think about getting a qualification in English and beginning her education. So I think modeling to be a parent rather than leaving a child in the ECEC environment is a really helpful starting point.
Okay, thank you so much, Colin, for your insights. I see we are also getting some inputs on the Padlet, and there are also some suggestions that of kind of parental involvement and building these communities and networks together with parents is one way also to or one of the necessary ways to create those rich literacy environments. I see there are quite a few questions about the digital tools. I would leave them for the second Padlet because this is what our actually question is focusing on. But before we move to the second question, maybe I would also leave the floor to Sari to react to this question and maybe to some of the insights from the Padlet.
Yeah, I think what Colin told us, and also some of the comments here in Padlet, they are related to sort of reaching the adults, the parents via the child, and I think it's a very good sort of approach and successful strategy. My concern is that we have many adults who cannot be reached via their children. For instance, they don't have children or children have grown up and so on. And how can we support these adults and how can we reach them? I think it's a huge issue with adults in literacy work, how to reach them. And we have tried a lot of things also in our national context. Librarians have gone to sort of social services, to places where adults with low literacy are, where they are and where they sort of interact with authorities, for instance. And we've had library people collaborating with the military, where they can reach a lot of young men, for instance, and so on. But these so far have been a fairly small scale projects. And I think we have to sort of work on all fronts with children and families, but also provide provision for adults who cannot be reached that way. But it's not an easy task, and it also needs resources. And unfortunately, for instance, my own country, there are not a lot of resources for this phase, adults in literacy work. But there are some European countries who do a lot of good work with this. And I think we could also turn to those for good practice examples.
Thank you so much, Sari. And I see that there are also some questions related to the literacy skills of the educators and childcare carers themselves, especially in the early stages. And I think actually Colin's and Sari report talks a lot about the need for professional development at different stages, and also some examples of what works for the professional development. So I invite people also to read the report. And maybe I would suggest, in the interest of time, to move to the second question we have on the Padlet, and also engage in the conversation there, also together in the context of the basic skills plan on action plan on basic skills that Oana presented, because both Oana and Colin actually highlighted this complex role of digital technologies, that they both offer opportunities, but also some concerning distractions. And Sari's talk on Finnish strategy and the focus on multiliteracy also highlights these tensions of our multimodal world. So our question is, in this current digital or multimodal world, I really like this definition of the world we live today. How should we approach those key challenges to literacy development and use the potential of technology and mitigate those concerns? And I think also from Colin, we learned that it's so important to foster this culture of reading. But how to foster it when there are so many attractive digital distractions which are competing for attention and time? So maybe I would give the floor to you, Oana, to first start this discussion, and then to Sari and Colin to share their reflections. And of course, all of you who are viewing this webinar, please also share your insights on the Padlet.
Yeah, no, indeed, with digital technology, we should, I mean, there are some obvious, how should I say, advantages, and, especially all these types of personalized learning can hugely help. But I think building capacity, parents, educators, learners themselves, it's crucial. And technology should be seen as a mean, not as an objective in itself, and in the sense that we need to offer a variety of alternatives which exist. And from this perspective, building and offering libraries in schools, and offering the wealth of other tools that children can interact to, it's very important. And also, just to link a bit, maybe also with the previous question, when looking at libraries, and when we look also at a certain school and the diversity it can exist in terms of languages spoken, for instance, to bring books in the written in the home language of those children, and this way it raises the curiosity, it stimulates interaction. So there needs to be in place strategies to, not leave just the digital device be the only attraction. And then we also see restrictions also taking place in schools and countries moving towards restricting personal devices and mobile phones.
Thank you so much, Oana. And just also to link to one of the questions in the previous Padlet about the digital tools, because I think Colin in his presentation talked also about the potential of leveraging the technology. So there was a question on what kind of digital tools were reviewed already in that analysis done by you and Sari and other co-authors. So maybe I would give the floor to you to respond to that and to this broader question. Colin, the floor is yours.
Okay, if I may, I would say the work I've done and Bernadette Dwyer has done in Ireland is relevant here. Both Bernadette and I have done work looking at how children develop the skills of internet searching. And Bernadette looked at primary school students and I looked at secondary. And in both cases, what we found was that getting children to do internet searching in groups of 3 was very, very helpful because the children are modeling for other students how they might do that task. If they do it in a way that's ineffective or simplistic, often the more experienced reader will offer an alternative strategy or a critique of what's going on. What Bernadette found was that you can't simply give primary school children a group context and say, get on with it. That doesn't work. 8 and 9-year-olds do not spontaneously work well in a group. They need to have a role. And what Bernadette did was to say, okay, in your group of 3, one of you is the task manager, one of you is the navigator deciding where we go on the internet, and the third one is the evaluator. And the evaluator's job is to say, is this true? Is this relevant to our question? And so she taught them what those roles meant before she let them loose in a group of 3. And then the children were developing critical digital literacy skills in their small groups. And I found the same thing working with older students. I did 25-minute recordings of a group of 3 or 4 students asking quite a complex question of the internet. And what I found was that it sometimes took 5 or 10 minutes for the group to get beyond a very simple and trivial surface level answer to someone saying, is this really what we should be doing? If we went deeper, what would we challenge? What would we ask? How might we frame a better search question in order to get our answers? And then you see 15-year-olds behaving as well as undergraduates in terms of both having intelligent, critical internet skills, but also modeling those skills for their classmates. And then you can see why learning, it's not simply talk that's good. You can see why valuable learning comes from that talk.
Okay, thank you so much, Colin. I see that we are also getting some interesting ideas on the Padlet, which sometimes are a bit conflicting. Some are calling for separation, but some like for acknowledging and acceptance that this is the modern world, and like it's also space for the literacy development, and how we need to find the techniques to improve focus and attention in today's environment of constant distractions. So I will give the time and space to also Sari to react to this question and maybe think of how we can also overcome this dichotomy of digital and offline literacy development and what the research shows us.
Yeah, that's a very sort of a timely question, isn't it? And I quite like the comment in Padlet by Clever Hummingbird who is arguing for a balance, perhaps more than sort of the dichotomy. So I also think that we are living in a world, and we can certain kind of world, and we cannot turn the clock backwards. What we can do is try to develop competencies to sort of manage all this, how to sort of let's say, search for information and approach it critically, how to sort of create strategies, as I think Grasshopper says here, develop techniques to improve focus and resist the distractions in an online environment, and so on. And certainly a lot of support and materials are needed also for teachers. In Finland, we have a very impressive large research project called The Critical. And as you may imagine, it is focusing on critical literacy in online environment. And it has shown, first of all, that all students in all age groups, let's say students in all age groups to be exact, do struggle. And secondary students even may struggle a lot with critical literacy. And they have also, based on their research project, developed a lot of different materials for teachers to use as such, if they like, in their teaching, or apply them as they wish. And I think this is a work that needs to continue. In Finland, we have also gone to the direction of, let's say, banning mobile phones at schools. We now have a law for that. And I do wonder, if I may say so, that what has happened to adults' capability of being adults in different situations, if we need a law that bans mobile phones in class. And it's also a little bit problematic if we also want to teach responsible use of digital materials, to ban those devices, even only in the classroom. But it's certainly something that we need to continue doing research on.
Thank you, Sari. I think you are raising some of the controversial or very timely questions again, and the policymakers, I think, across Europe are discussing about the phone bans or digital restrictions. And maybe Oana will let me to advertise a little bit, because ENESET is working on one report exactly on this question, trying to understand the rationale between the bans and how they are being implemented, and what kind of perceptions around those and evidence being gathered around those bans. So stay tuned. It will be also launched sometime early next year. And hopefully we will have another webinar around this issue. So, but with this, also having in mind the time, I would then suggest to finish this discussion at this point. And thank you everyone for your very active participation, and also to all our speakers for sharing all this very interesting, nuanced insights. And I'm sure there are many questions still remaining, which we can continue discussing beyond the webinar. I think this was quite a rich conversation, and I again invite everyone to follow the ENESET newsletter, and also read the report with the link to which you received, and to stay tuned for the upcoming webinars and the reports. And we will share the recording and presentations after the events. And have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.